Okay, folks, let's talk about Sudan and Congo. Talk about Sudan and the Congo sound like the words that were heard around the leftist fucking world, and it is now finally in the news. And I want to basically give y'all the way to talk about it without, number one, being a fucking imperialist, number two, being fucking racist, and number three, actually able to talk about it. Because it's important that like people feel empowered to actually talk about this issue effectively without falling into the traps that are done about it. So, first of all, let's give some background on what's going on. I'm not going to go into the Hassan drama, um, mainly because I don't care. Okay. So, I'd rather focus on the tools and reasons to effectively integrate Sudan and Congo into anti imperial work. And so, let's start. What's going on? Frankly, first of all, I'm not an expert. I am not a human rights expert. I don't study this shit. And if you want to learn like fully about the conflict, go read the two Wikipedia pages. They're great. Both of these conflicts have gone on for more than a decade, and many of the belligerents are all imperfect. Like there is no good guy or bad guy in a lot of these things explicitly. There are better people and worse people. The focus for Western leftists, though, to avoid justifying or promoting justification for further imperialism, should be the role of the Western imperial powers for further imperialism um, and their proxies in the conflicts. With this focus, the target's quite clear. The UAE, and generally all the Western powers that are funding and transacting with them, and Western multinational corporations. So let's draw those threads really quickly. First of all, Sudan. Sudan is perhaps the clearest and the most dire currently, right? It is being reported that multiple thousands have been slaughtered in Sudan within the past week by the Rapid Support Forces, and in what is quite clearly a genocide. The Rapid Support Forces is also an internationally designated terrorist group, a word that I'm very reticent to use derogatorily, frankly, because of how bastardized it's been. But that is the accurate term here. And it has a near formal relationship with the United Arab Emirates, right? So the state right above Saudi Arabia, the UAE, where Dubai and Abu Dhabi are, yeah, they're funding the RSF, and they basically don't deny it. I think they verbally deny it, but basically no one believes them. The Emirates are well known for funding and arming it, as well as facilitating an extraordinarily profitable gold trade from Sudanese gold, because Sudan is extraordinarily wealthy in gold and some other minerals. The Rapid Support Forces are the ones currently being accused of being the actual instruments of genocide. So they're the ones with the hatchets, they're the ones going through and killing people in Sudan. And this is alleged by the official Sudanese government in an ICJ filing. The ICJ case, I want to note, this is important, that the ICJ case in Sudan was dismissed not because of substantive claims. The ICJ case was dismissed on a technicality. And it is important because this dismissal would be used by people that want to deny that it's a genocide or deny that it's severe or deny the UAE's role in it by saying, well, the case got dismissed. Well, the case got dismissed because the UAE didn't sign the part of the treaty that gave the ICJ jurisdiction, right? So basically, you can sign a treaty between like America and Canada, for example. And under international law, when you sign the treaty, you are bound by it. But you have to basically do an additional thing, a compromissory clause, right? To say not only am I bound by this, but you can sue me in the International Court of Justice if I fail to do it. Or you can just sue me in the International Court of Justice and they can decide if I fail to do it. Um, and or other countries have basically universal compromissory clauses where they say, look, anyone can sue me generally for the general jurisdiction on the ICJ, and I'll just let the ICJ determine it. The UAE doesn't have one of these, right? And the Genocide Convention famously has a compromissory clause in it. I believe it's Article 6. I would need to check that. But the UAE did not sign the compromissory clause. So Sudan came and said, well, you can't sign the Genocide Convention and not sign the compromissory clause. That's basically not being a party, right? Because there's the concept of like non-severable clauses to the Genocide Convention or to human rights conventions, which I personally support, which means like if you're going to do human rights, you have to do it the whole way. But they didn't, and the ICJ didn't buy that argument and said, no, 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 okay, they're still a party to the Genocide Convention. They still can't commit genocide. Yay. But they can't litigate be litigated against. This, by the way, is important to Israel. Israel has signed Article 6 of the Genocide Convention, and this is how South Africa is able to challenge them in the ICJ, which I think is something that Israel fucking regrets now that the UAE has wiggled their way out of a case recently in this. So, yeah, that's basically, if anyone comes at you and goes, well, actually, this was brought to the ICJ, and the ICJ said they didn't. They do the same thing with Israel, right, where they go, well, the ICJ hasn't found genocide. Yeah, the ICJ hasn't answered the question of genocide for Israel yet. They're still in deliberations. They've done everything at the point that they can to determine that it's a genocide already. So it's just people lying. So it's important that you know the background of that a little bit. But yeah, so the RSF committing genocide, being armed by the UAE, and why? Why is the UAE interested in inciting racial conflicts and ethnic conflicts in Sudan? Well, it's not a very new game, right? It's the same game they've played for a very long time, which is they want to have a destabilized Africa because they want to extract resources from Africa. Ooh, who did we learn this from? The whole entire West. So the UAE, if you don't know, made a lot of their money being basically a bunch of free zones for like the world. So people could come to the UAE and trade. They're a zero tax state. It's very nice to live in the UAE. It's very expensive, but you can get like really nice places. And they have a specific free zone. So like free zones for tech where like there's basically no regulation. You can do whatever you want. The labor is like unregulated, so it's pretty cheap. They have a free zone for gold as well, where people bring in gold to the UAE. And the primary function here, I mean, it functions for a lot of things. Literally billions of dollars worth of gold go through the UAE each year. But why it does is because with gold specifically, gold is valuable as itself, right? And so as long as you don't mark where the gold is coming from, you know, you have money that isn't traceable. And so what happens is people bring dirty gold from, I don't know, let's say Sudan into the UAE, and gold that was maybe mined by people working with the RSF on stolen territory. I don't know, crazy example. And then the UAE brings that in, and then they melt down that gold, make it into new bars, and they just say, I don't know where this came from. This came from the UAE. It was melted and brought by the UAE. Crazy. Now it's clean gold because it all goes through a mixer. And so they're money laundering. So the UAE is literally a money laundering operation for African gold. And it helps people that work with the UAE, or no, like America, get out of their human rights obligations. Because if you, for example, have blood minerals from Sudan in your products, and they're very cheap, right? You get cheaper gold this way. You don't want people to know that. And so if you can say it came from the UAE, and the UAE just doesn't have very good regulations on it, but like we know we can work with the UAE, then you can get cheaper gold from Sudan without having the human rights obligations or consequences from it. It's a way to obfuscate, and it makes the UAE a shit ton of money every single year. So yeah, Sudan, they're escalating racial tensions so that the RSF, who is generally willing to work with the UAE, as opposed to the Sudanese government that might want to limit that, is gaining more control and is committing genocide against the non-Arab population. This also goes into a certain culture war issue, but especially as Western leftists, this is kind of something I push, is the ethnic conflicts are there across the board. I mean, America has ethnic tensions that could be pushed and are being pushed. What matters here is why foreign multinational corporations and, you know, wealthy people are trying to push and pull on these ethnic conflicts, much less just that there's a long history of them. They're important, and especially if you're a Sudanese or Congolese, as I'll talk about, they're relevant to understand. But if we're thinking about how to address this conflict and what to boycott and how, and especially so as to not promote a certain racist view of people in Africa as particularly tribal when, you know, we're just as tribal, I will focus on the material reasons and the material justifications. Also because I'm a Marxist, right? I'm not like a diehard materialist. I think ideas matter, like at least in the short to medium term. That's obviously not what materialism actually means, but whatever. But like I will focus on the material because that's the best way we can undermine it. So yeah, UAE bad guy in Sudan. More complicated than that, but only slightly, you know. It's interesting. So let's move on to the Congo. Okay, let's talk about Congo. Congo's a bit more complex, but I want to focus on a specific part of the Congo, which is the M23 militias. So the M23 militias are funded and effectively a paramilitary wing of the Rwandan government. And I want to comment that the more we say the word M23, the less we say the word Rwanda, and that is bad. This is Rwanda invading the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and if we had a sufficiently complex understanding of how international law should work, that is the word we would be using. Because if you are a government funding a paramilitary group in another country, you're invading that country. That's what's happening. But somehow the West has convinced the world that that's not what that means. So I'm going to say that it is Rwanda invading. It is the M23 militias technically, but it doesn't make a difference. It is a trick. It is a lie. It is a way to obfuscate the fact that Rwanda is trying to destabilize and effectively annex portions of Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo that have particular ethnic majorities. Once again, I'm going to decenter actively the ethnic majority and majoritarian conflicts, even though, once again, this is a genocide. Because, once again, the reason I'm doing that is because this is a genocide, but it is a genocide for a purpose. There is a reason this genocide is being committed, and it is not just because they're particularly like animalistic or tribal, as the racist caricatures want you to believe, but it is because there is a material incentive and aim for this genocide. It is important we center and forward that. And if you want to hear about the ethnic tensions, once again, go read the Wikipedia page. Good, just checking that I don't have any echo on. Okay, so a large part of this conflict, is ethnic violence stemming from long ethnic conflicts following the Rwandan genocide. It falls on similar ethnic lines, actually, if you're interested. But Rwanda, first of all, if you don't know, is between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or generally in Central Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. Rwanda is particularly well connected to the West in a way that the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or even Congo itself, is not. The best example of this may well be the Rwandan scheme from the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, which has a very close relationship with Rwanda. Rwanda also has a very close relationship with France and with Germany. The Rwanda scheme in the United Kingdom, thank God, was found to be unconstitutional, but they kept trying. They keep trying. It was a crazy fucking scheme where they wanted to send rejected asylum seekers, because that's what they were, right? They were rejected asylum seekers. They were not illegal immigrants. They wanted to send them to Rwanda. And think about how crazy that is. Rwanda is committing a genocide in Congo right now. We know they are. There is credible accusations by Amnesty International that they are committing a genocide against people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the United Kingdom wanted to send people that are not Rwandan, not have any relationship to Rwanda, don't know anyone in Rwanda, to Rwanda, simply because they saw them as literally exchangeable. They saw them as a means to an end, to disincentivize other asylum seekers from coming in. This is how deeply integrated proxies of the Western empires and imperial proxies are with the proxies and empires themselves. So much so that they literally view non-British people as interchangeable. Oh, they're from Syria? Yeah, they can just go to Rwanda, even though there's literally no cultural crossover there. So it's the M23 militias, Rwandan militias, have also been found with United Kingdom and American and French weaponry. And Amnesty, once again, has a very effective write-up over this. But what's important here is why? Why is Rwanda an asset to these Western empires? Why is there such a close connection there? And it's not super clear. I mean, why? There's some cultural background. There's some international legal background with the tribunals, right? But the one that I want to highlight is the fact that Western multinational corporations have a lot to gain from a connection to Rwanda, and specifically Rwanda as a destabilizing agent in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And this is where I just want to mention, I don't mention in the article, but I want to mention here, that this strategy of having a destabilizing agent, just as the RSF is, Rwanda is, Israel is, in certain areas, is literally Kissinger's playbook. So Kissinger made this entente understanding of international conflicts, where proxy wars are used as battlefields for the great powers to even out power, to avoid a major war. That's a very basic explanation and insufficient. But he also explicitly created the strategy of creating agitators to actively destabilize movements that they wanted to destabilize. So, for example, with the Pan-Arabist movement, radical Islam and Salafism in the Saudi Arabia was used to destabilize pan-Arabist aspirations. They famously pitted socialists, communists, and pan-Arabists against each other in what ultimately led to the destruction of Iraq, control by Islamists of Iran, and then destruction ultimately of Syria. The only way Syria was able to avoid that was by an authoritarian dictatorship. Iraq was eventually taken over by a dictatorship that America used to justify invading and destroying it. So this strategy of creating littler but destabilizing and funded places to project instability across very large areas, right? This is destabilizing all of the Democratic Republic of Congo. All of Sudan is being destabilized by a comparatively small militia. All of the Middle East is being destabilized and has been destabilized by a comparatively small Israel. It works. And if you only want chaos, it's very much easier to get chaos than it is to get order. And this is what the American and Western empires do. And so this is like a structure I want you to think about this in, is all of these are the West going in and finding a destabilizing agent. And once again, this is all simpler than it actually is, right? There's actually billions of dollars of organization, military, etc. into this. But they're finding a destabilizing agent. And the reason they want instability is when they have instability, the people with order win. And you know who has order? Corporations. Corporations can go in and work with any group that is there. And they are really good at it, especially if that group has no documentation, like terrorist groups don't have any documentation. And this is when we get to Apple, which has been credibly accused. I don't want Apple to sue me, and they probably won't, but they have been credibly accused of using blood minerals from the DRC. And you know who accused them of that? The DRC. So, Apple rejects this. They're lying. I mean... Who trusts? Do you trust Apple? Do you trust Google? Do you think these people have your best interests in mind? Do you think these people give a fuck about human rights? No, they don't. Okay, so let's just tell the whole story, and this is my opinion, okay? Ooh, guys, call the press. This is my opinion. What's happening here is the West is tolerating and at times actively enabling Rwanda to engage in increasing ethnic tensions in the DRC and in across the region, really, to allow and the reason the West is doing so is because multinational corporations make a shit ton of money from having a deeply destabilized place in there that they can extract in deeply unfair and unorganized working conditions, minerals, and specifically minerals that are essential to making phones like tungsten, etc. So that's kind of the through line, is you want to find the place that the West is using as a pressure point to cause instability, and then you want to find the connection between the West and that point of instability, and then the reason that they want that particular area to be unstable. And very simply, I mean, governments organize for their people, and corporations coming in and stealing a shit ton of money from a place or a shit ton of minerals from a place is against the interests of those people. So the more corrupt, more unorganized a state you have, the more extraction you can get. And the example I always use for this is Botswana. Botswana has had a comparatively stable state in Africa for a very long time, in part because colonists didn't effectively destabilize Botswana, in part because they didn't have a reason to, right? Because there weren't as many discovered natural resources during colonialism at the time of colonization. Whereas they found diamonds later, and then Botswana, who didn't get fucked with, already had a somewhat democratic regime, and just had their people in charge, nationalized the diamond industry, and now are one of the most human rights countries in the area. So yeah, that's what you want to look for. A reason to destabilize, the method by which they're destabilizing, and then you will find the reasons for the violence. And once again, this is highly simplified, highly under-explanatory, but whatever. That's what we do here, folks. So I want to end this with a note on how they're going to try and hide this and why you don't want to fall for it, right? You don't want to fall for what they're going to do. So they're going to try and label this. They're going to try and label this a humanitarian crisis. They're going to try and erase both at the same time. They're going to try and erase Western intervention and general external intervention in this area. And they are going to try and erase African autonomy. And how they do this is so let's first of all see how they erase Western and, external intervention. They go, oh my God, This is so sad. Thousands have died after RSF attacks in Sudan. This brutality must end, and we need a massive increase in humanitarian aid to the area. End of story. No explanation for why the RSF is attacking. No explanation for how the RSF ended up getting weapons. No explanation for, what I bet these people couldn't even label Sudan on a fucking map or any of the natural resources in Sudan. And you see what that does? The solution, if it's a humanitarian crisis, or the solution, if it's a, charitable event, is Western charities go in, West have the money, right? The Western charities go in and go, oh, here are a few potatoes. I hope you get better after being slaughtered by our arms. There's nothing else to do. Oh my goodness, what could I conceivably do after, my country killed all of you? That's what they're going to do. And when, and especially if not only Western charities go in, but Western governments go in with aid, right? This is what Trump didn't understand about U.S. aid, is if U.S. aid comes in and says, okay, Sudanese government, we'll give you some money to like feed your people because I know we killed all of them, but, we'll give you some money because we're so kind and so good. But you need to change your policies. Right? That's what the IMF does. They say, you're broke? Oh, God, how did you conceivably be broke, you silly, silly, silly global south people? You need to change your policies to the great neoliberalism, right? You need an economic reform. And then we blame them for their own destabilization because it's a humanitarian crisis. They let a humanitarian crisis happen to their own people. How incompetent. And then they do neoliberal reforms. And you know what those neoliberal reforms allow? The exact same thing that destabilization allows. A completely feckless government in defending their people from extraction of multinational corporations. They allowed multinational corporations to come in and do massive land grabs in exchange for measly concessions to the government. So that's why they want you to believe it's just a humanitarian crisis, and they erase Western intervention. Not only because we'll feel bad, right, but because then they can blame the government and force more concessions against them by leveraging the exact economic interests that caused this problem in the first place. So once you start recognizing that, once you start seeing that in all of your fucking media, you'll start seeing it everywhere. You'll start seeing these patterns, and you feel crazy. But it's there, guys. They're doing it, not maybe on purpose, but it's just natural, right? If you're coming from the West, you have a natural inclination, and you're racist, right? So you automatically think it's their fault. Right? They're brown people. Of course they're going to mess up. Duh. Right? Of course they're animalistic and can't figure out these silly tribe things, not realizing that, like, the whole thing holding the EU back is tribalism. And America. What do you think ICE is, So that's what they're going to do. And the narrative that you must do is decenter the cultural wars of Africa, right? Or decenter the tribalism in Africa and actually center the fact that this is the United Arab Emirates invading Africa to steal resources. This is Apple at least tolerating, but also actively funding, allegedly, an invasion by Rwanda into the UAE, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, so as to steal resources. That's what they're doing, and that's what they've always been doing. So yeah, that's what I have to say on that. Thank you so much for listening. Apologies for my allergies. They're horrible. And I hope you all have a good day.